Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am the Omni viewer, and as many of you know by now, I am a connoisseur of 1950s science fiction. As such, I've known for a while now about a movie called Robot Monster. In fact, I think many of you might know this movie by reputation, as it's known as one of the worst sci-fi movies ever made, thanks largely due to the monster's appearance.
Behold the Ro-Man, considered by many to be one of the worst creature designs of all time. It's literally a gorilla costume with the head swapped out for a diving helmet. Talk about low budget, right? Just one look at the Ro-Man and you can probably guess what kind of movie this is without seeing it.
And you know what? I think a lot of people have done exactly that. I said I knew this movie by reputation, but it was only recently that I had procured a means of actually seeing it for myself.
By which you naturally mean you acquired a used copy for dirt cheap, right?
In less flowery language, yes.
So now that you've seen it, how was it?
Well, it certainly lives up to its reputation.
Robot Monster was clearly made on a shoestring budget. The acting ranges from campy to non-existent. There's stock footage galore with little context, and the tone is wildly inconsistent.
Heck, the entire movie is built around the "it was all a dream" cliché, which is a personal pet peeve of mine.
The whole scenario is just a little boy's nightmare, and the movie presents us with this fact at the beginning, so the film has absolutely no stakes at all. And yet, there is something that surprised me about this movie. For such a ridiculous camp fest, it's surprisingly dark.
I kid you not, folks, Robot Monster is much bleaker than its reputation would lead you to think, at least within the confines of the dream.
Our focus is on one family, comprised of a scientist, his wife, their 2 daughters, and their son. Incidentally, this is all his nightmare. That family and the older daughter's maybe boyfriend are the last human beings, possibly the last living creatures of any kind, left on Earth. Everything else has been single-handedly wiped out by Ro-Man XJ2, no relation to Jenny XJ9. He's an advanced scout from the Ro-Man Empire.
Pun not intended?
And the only reason he missed the family is because the scientist father developed methods of concealing them which are not guaranteed to last forever.
This bleakness is enhanced by how, according to Ro-Man, he only had to fire a couple of shots to trigger everyone's Cold War paranoia, and everyone started dropping nukes on each other, doing most of the work for him.
Wherever I directed the calcinator beam, they crumbled. At first, the fools thought it came from one among their many nations. They began destroying each other with hydrogen bombs.
Right off the bat, we're given a scenario packed to the brim with hopelessness.
The family is determined to figure out some way to defeat Ro-Man, but you have to wonder what the point would even be. Mankind already lost, they're the last ones left, and they can't repopulate the planet by themselves. Even if they could, Ro-Man's invasion and the ensuing panic have left Earth a lifeless radioactive husk. I suppose they could win just to say they won, but who would care?
No, really, who? It's not like anyone else is gonna come along and marvel at how humanity stood its ground to the bitter end.
Early on, Ro-Man XJ2 speaks to his leader, the Great Guidance, and it's revealed in conversation that only Earth and the Ro-Man homeworld are populated. There's no life anywhere else in the universe, and one race just wiped the other off the map like it was nothing.
No life has been discovered on any other planets. Earth is our only rival.
Talk about a bleak vision of reality. Even H.P. Lovecraft filled his uncaring cosmos with alien life. The cosmos of Robot Monster is just empty, save for a race of heartless cyborg apes and what little is left of mankind.
This honestly surprised me on my first viewing. Of all the tones I expected Robot Monster to aim for, depression and hopelessness were not among them. But when I stopped to think about it, I realized that it actually made sense within a historical context.
Robot Monster was released in 1953, a point at which the Cold War was still young and terrifying.
You think times are bad these days with schools running mass shooter drills? At least you can potentially escape a shooter.
Back in the 50s, schools would show you films about what to do if a nuke is dropped during class, and the best course of action they could think of was to hide under your desk. I mean, sure, that might protect you from falling rubble, but it won't do much against the lethal doses of radiation. Really think about that for a minute, folks. For children in the 1950s, the threat of nuclear annihilation was an ever-looming threat they just had to be ready for.
And, as you may recall, this whole movie is framed specifically as a child's dream.
If Robot Monster has any kind of message, it would be think of the children, because it shows how the terrifying reality of the Cold War could affect a child's psyche, forcing them to confront the idea of death long before they're mentally and emotionally ready.
Or at least that's the idea on paper. Let us not forget that this is Robot Monster we're talking about.
With that in mind, any attempt at being heavy and thought-provoking is ruined by elements that are silly and weird, like the whimsical bubbles made by Roman's machine, or lines such as this.
You look like a pooped-out pinwheel.
I mean, you could say the movie has a built-in excuse, what with it being a little boy's dream and all, but that still doesn't change the result.
Well, what do you expect from a movie with such a cheap-looking monster?
Actually, I'm glad you brought that up again, Snazzy, because I think there's more to the Roman's design than first meets the eye.
You can't be serious.
Oh, can't I?
Like I said at the beginning, this is considered an infamously bad design that looks like two Halloween costumes were thrown together and declared good enough because they were shooting the next day.
Is it really that simple, though? Based on what Roman XJ2 goes through, I'm not so sure it is.
Somewhat surprisingly for a movie of this era, the Roman is not just a one-note antagonist. He goes through a proper character arc, one that's almost more interesting than what the one-note humans go through, and it makes him oddly compelling in a way that might actually justify his design.
You actually mean that, don't you? Oh, I have got to hear this one.
Well, let's get one thing out of the way first. Like many silver screen aliens of the 50s, Roman and his people are one giant communism metaphor.
They lack such things as personal goals, identifying marks, or even individual personalities. They are a homogenized collective in service to the state, and the state decrees that Roman must be all there is, hence why the human must be exterminated. I'm sure this will come as a shock to no one, since this was pretty common for 50s American sci-fi.
Where things get interesting is when Roman XJ2 starts developing independence.
And how does he develop this independence, pray tell?
By discovering women, of course.
When the Roman first lays his eyes, or rather empty eye sockets, on the eldest daughter of the last human family, he feels something that he does not at first understand.
It's called an erection. It's either that or malaria.
He wishes to meet with the female to negotiate, and then he decides that he'll keep her alive for himself.
You see, the Roman has an awakening of sorts, where he realizes that he has desires beyond what is good for the Empire, desires that only benefit him personally, and these conflict with the orders which he is compelled to carry out.
I wish to make an estimate of my own. To think for yourself is to be like the human. Feel, want. Why are these things not in the plan?
As such, he becomes openly defiant, trying to figure out how he can have his cake and eat it too, and this leads to his ultimate undoing.
I propose that this internal conflict is externally represented by Roman's infamous design.
From the neck up, he's a skull encased within a mechanical device. In other words, he's a cold, unfeeling machine. From the shoulders down, though, he resembles a gorilla, a creature which has long been associated with virility and primal urges. Incorrectly, mind you, but it was the 50s. The point is, these two elements which don't look like they should ever go together visually represent Roman's personal conflict so well that I feel like it had to be intentional. His rational mind is at odds with his irrational body.
Granted, I can't tell you if the Ark inspired the suit or the suit inspired the Ark. It's a chicken or the egg question, and as far as I've seen, nobody has ever cared about this movie enough to ever bother asking it.
Besides which, you can't deny that it's an iconic design in spite of itself. Negative reputation aside, Roman is instantly recognizable, and I attribute that largely to how weird he looks. The combination of a diving helmet with a gorilla suit is just so odd that it's stuck in people's minds, and it's not only still recognized today, it's even the subject of homage.
Why else do you think Minion from Megamind looks like a mechanical gorilla with a fishbowl in place of its head? That's a direct reference to Roman. Despite all the odds, he's become a staple of the genre.
Okay, but Robot Monster is still a bad movie, right?
Oh yeah, it's a train wreck, but in a fascinating way.
There's no getting around the fact that Robot Monster has all the hallmarks of a terrible low-budget B-movie. But I'd never recommend that anyone skip it. There's some fascinating stuff to be found here, even if the presentation leaves a lot to be desired.
Robot Monster is the best kind of bad movie, if that makes any sense. And if it surprised me, it might surprise you as well. Until such time as we meet again, this is the Omni Viewer, signing off.
I cannot, yet I must. How do you calculate that?
If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like it as well as subscribe to the channel for more content of a similar nature. Also, check the description for links to our Twitter, DeviantArt, and Patreon pages, as well as the Amazon link for the novel Operation Red Dragon: The Daikaiju Wars Part 1, penned by yours truly. Thank you all, and we appreciate your support.